Welcome to another episode of The Art of Volunteering. I'm your host, Stormy Bell. Today, I'm very excited about our conversation. My friend Anne Gaughen is going to be on. She is the Director of Alumni Engagement and Annual Fund at Lasell University, and I've had the pleasure of working with her on some projects. So she's just really cool. So I'm looking forward to everything that she has to share. Just to share a little bit about her, Anne wears a lot of different hats professionally. She works in alumni engagement and advancement, supporting high level volunteers in their engagement cycle with the university. She came from Girl Scouts of Eastern Mass, where she supported about 1,500 adult volunteers in creating outstanding leadership experiences for girls. Prior to that, she helped start a nonprofit, Boston Glow, Girls, Leadership, and Organized Women. And she currently volunteers as president of the Hingham Working Dog Foundation and helps provide support for Opry, a comfort dog in the Hingham public schools and community. And in a whole other part of her life, she writes young adult novels, which her and I have not ever talked about. So I'm really excited if she tucks that in there someplace too. So welcome, Anne. I'm very excited to have you with us.
I'm so excited to be here. I always love talking about volunteering and the power it has with it.
That's awesome. All right, let's start with how volunteering is actually super complex. I'd love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, I do. And I mean, I think I have a unique insight into this because I have worked in so many different aspects of volunteerism, volunteer engagement, and really looking at the volunteer cycle. But there's just so many pieces that go into it, and there's a really long history behind it, especially in as it relates to the role that women play in the volunteer workforce. Growing out of an organization, I've worked with several organizations that were focused on women's leadership, including, as you mentioned, Girl Scouts. And Girl Scouts was an organization that I came up through as a child. I started the nonprofit Boston Glow with several friends of mine. And these were all focused on really addressing some inequities that women face, but also just the unique challenges of supporting women. And there comes a very interesting part of the conversation with volunteerism, because so much of it Venn diagrams with the unpaid labor of women, and the larger conversation that happens around that. And yet, for both of these cases, for both the unpaid labor of women and for the power of volunteerism, these are the things that change communities, lives, make deep economic and personal impacts, and that both resonate and can be really strongly documented. So we see few things that are more powerful, but also there is, a real complexity there about who is getting paid for what work exists outside of sort of payment and corporate structure, and when it's appropriate for it to be in one camp versus another, and how we move back and forth. So I'm very, very interested in the intersection of all of these things and how they both play together to sometimes. I think volunteerism can be a really rebellious act in a lot of ways. You're kind of acting on the outskirts of a larger system. And sometimes, I think almost always, it is one of the most critical acts to supporting community and, really what it takes to get the job done.
I talk to a lot of organizations, either volunteers themselves or nonprofit leaders or like volunteer leaders or even corporations. And we really don't touch on the fact that there has been unpaid labor of
Mm,
particularly women. They're usually focused on the impact that it's making in the community that's not being met by the government. It's not necessarily being met by the like the for profits. So they want to bring in their employees to give back. So that's where their focus is. So that's kind of what I've experienced. On the Outer Volunteering, we cover a variety of different type of organizations that have volunteering, but we tend to go gravitate towards more human services, working with children, working
mhm.
with older people, Meals on Wheels, opportunities like that. So it's just very interesting to reflect on like the origins where it took advantage of particularly women and just where that's come to and evolved.
Yeah, and I think it's not even entirely that it took advantage of women. I think it also became a very powerful outlet for women.
Okay.
You look at an organization like Girl Scouts that was founded long before women had access to bank accounts.
Right.
And in these troops, they are, supporting young girls on financial literacy and selling cookies and reinvesting those funds to fund new activities. They are creating ways for financial freedom to be given to their daughters and their daughters' friends in a system that was shutting them out. And I think that there's so much of that experience that, like you're saying, existed in the ways that government or supported society was not supporting them at the time. So it both was a really powerful outlet and a really powerful act.
Mhm.
But then, and to this day, there's so many skills that you learn from volunteering that you can gain without sort of formal job experience that then can lead to huge leaps in job experience. But I think that it's a balancing act because, of course, it naturally recognizes the fact that there is unpaid labor there, but it also needs to recognize the power imbalance that created that
Mhm.
and how women were really working outside of the system to get their needs met in that sense, and really became a force.
Right. Yeah, I agree. So moving on, let's talk about your volunteer journey because you've done a variety of things. I know you've been a speaker. You write the books, even though that's not your volunteer. That's like your side passion. It
It feels a little like volunteering
does.
sometimes. Publishing can be rough.
Have you been published?
Yes, so I have 5 published books. I all of my books are published through, Bloomsbury USA, which is the, Harry Potter's publisher.
Oh,
Well,
cool.
they're Harry Potter's UK publisher. They're not published by Bloomsbury in the US, um, but our parent company is. Um, so yeah, it's not one of the big 5, but it is, traditional published. You can buy it in Barnes& and Noble and
Oh, that's awesome.
Amazon and all the things. I'm sure I should probably have books. I mean,
Well, I can see you have quite a few books, so you must be an avid reader as well.
there's one of them.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's I think is that the older cover? I don't yeah, I think this was the first edition cover. The covers have since changed because again, publishing changes all the time.
That's so cool. I love that. All right. So circling back, your volunteer journey. Just
Yes.
hear what your journey in volunteering. You probably started in Girl Scouts?
I would imagine that was probably the first, even though as, child, it's probably not considered volunteering. I don't know. What is the true definition?
Right.
I think that was probably one of my first examples of service,
Okay.
was Girl Scouts. Certainly beyond that, I grew up in the Catholic Church. Service was absolutely an aspect of that. And I went to a Catholic high school where service was, a huge element of how we engaged with the community. So, and absolutely my family as well, considered volunteering and serving the community to be not even a responsibility, but just part of what you do. It's how you engage. It's how you show up.
Mhm.
And I think it's even more basic and intrinsic than a responsibility. But I think that I'd always had this modeled for me, so it was kind of something that as I went through college, I started at Mount Holyoke College. I ended up going on a junior abroad to the University of St. Andrews, and I never came back. I graduated from there. I did a master's degree there. I lived there for a while after that. My mother was very upset. Uh, but I think this was something that had always taught me to re-examine the systems around me and see where I could be of service and where I could make a difference, and really sort of empowered me to see myself as an agent of change. And I think that kind of made the difference for the shift in my young life. When I came back from St. Andrews, eventually after all of this, I, was catching up with a friend of mine, and we were having this conversation over breakfast about this gap between there's a couple different gaps that we were talking about where young women, there's this drop off point where around middle school, young women, if they're not getting support, particularly from near peers and peers, they lose confidence dramatically. They don't see themselves as leaders. They're less likely to opt into leadership roles. They have to be asked something like 6 times to take on a leadership position that men never have to be asked for. And all these different things that we were really talking about of how we interrupt this cycle that's going on that is shutting women out of leadership positions in so many aspects, in politics, in corporations, in every career. Um, where are women lacking the confidence? And we saw that echoed in young women. So, we were, I think, 20, 24, 25 at the time. And we were seeing this all around us as well, that women didn't want to step up and take leadership positions or take on too much. And there was just a barrier there. And it wasn't because they didn't want this, the things that went with it, or they didn't want to do the work. They were just unsure that it was their right or their place. Um, so that was how Boston Glow was born, about really seeing a need and seeing a unique angle on the need, to be able to, the whole mission of that organization was to link young women with slightly older young women, to have a mentorship relationship and create networking opportunities for the adult women, and a scholarship, and ultimately a micro grant program for the younger women to create projects of change in their communities, which was fantastic. And I think I saw so quickly how what I could really do when I didn't have to ask for other people's permission.
Mhm.
And that was really that's really what kept me coming back to volunteering often, is that I find that if I'm the one in a leadership position, I can just make the decision, and I don't have to wait for somebody to tell me yes or no. And I find that that is really compelling, because there's so many aspects of my life where I don't have control. I don't expect to have control. I'm not entitled to control. But it's really nice to be able to have some things where I know what I can contribute. I get to decide what I can contribute. And it feels like that reclamation, and being able to sort of take a piece of myself back in how I want to serve my community and the way I wish to express myself engaging with my community. So from there, I've done a lot of stuff in a lot of places. So I've done a lot of work with writing organizations. As we mentioned, I'm also an author. I've done a lot of teaching of writing. I've done a master's degree in education, in the arts and education. So that involved a little bit of writing, a lot of education stuff. But I've worked with a lot of nonprofit centers or other conferences to teach workshops, to work with young people on writing, and really trying to figure out how we can support people in expressing themselves in their own narratives. And then, yeah, really, I tend to jump into organizations that I am interested in and that I think I can make a positive impact in. So at the moment, as we mentioned, I'm supporting the Hingham Working Dog Foundation as the president. We work with a dog named Opry. She is a sweetheart. She's a comfort dog primarily for the Hingham public school system, but she does a lot of work in the community. And is joined by, she's kind of started a little revolution on the South Shore of Boston, because she has really demonstrated the impact that these comfort dogs can have. And she's started up a lot of similar programs in neighboring police departments, and I think the district attorney's office, or it's the sheriff's office, and then the district attorney's office has been very engaged with it. So there's a lot of different opportunities for these dogs to just make a really powerful, visible impact, in students' experience in the community, in children's experiences in the community. And there's a real connection point for marginalized communities within the community, within, these
Right.
affected communities, um, to be able to have a really positive engagement with not only their school or other government systems, but with police, which is really, really necessary right now.
That's awesome. All right. Can you boil that down to 60 seconds or less? Why do you volunteer?
Okay, all right, let's take a second.
Just take a second. Think about it. Just
I volunteer because it has been the way that I have found myself in a lot of ways. It has been absolutely selfish and it has been extremely selfless in a lot of ways. So it has been a way to engage with the community. It's been the most impactful way I've seen to create lasting change in communities, for myself and for others. Maybe that's good.
I
Could
love
probably
it.
rephrase that. Okay.
That's no, I think that's awesome because other people I've spoken with, it's like it gives purpose, but yet you feel you use the word selfish because the person giving gets so much out of it as much as the person receiving. It's just really interesting how that works out. And like,
Hmm.
so you're helping to make an impact or change or comfort, depending on what it is, but yet you walk away. There's a term called the soft glow. Like you just the person just feels like they're part of something bigger. And that's kind of like they like how that feeling is. So at the end of the day, they feel like, wow.
I think we've lost a lot of aspects of, historical community building.
Mhm.
As cities have expanded, we have urban sprawl. We've lost a lot of the. I know it's particularly since COVID. There's been a discussion of losing the third space, where people gather outside of home or work.
Right.
And I think that it really I think so much of the benefit of serving your community in any sense is not only the sense that you're doing something that is maybe morally good or,
Right.
altruistic in any way, and giving unto yourself, but it's also this idea that the stronger you create this community, the more you give to the things you care about, the more that they can turn around and give back to you, the more that they can support the things that you care about, and the more that that impact is really felt. I mean, I know you and I talk about in Lasell, and in higher education, so often, even small gifts or small acts of being able to give time, or showing up for the university in any way, it creates a stronger community. It signals to other people that, this is a powerful place of belonging. This is a place where I could belong. This is a place where I could get things out of. It
Mhm.
gives people permission to show up.
Right.
It gives people permission to exist and engage. And, we then, of course, mutually benefit from that because we are participating in that system. So I think I've definitely seen throughout my life, I think as a child, I benefited from a lot of communities that were pre existing. And I realized throughout my life that those communities take a lot of work to build and function. And it takes a lot of, drive and support to be able to make that work for everybody. And if you're not going to show up and do the driving and the supporting, then it might not be what you expect at the end of the day.
That's awesome. All right. So, from your wide variety of experiences, can you share a story of impact? Maybe one that kind of stands out a little bit more that you can see the direct from the volunteering to the direct impact in that community, whatever community it is.
Yeah, I think the first one that I think of off the top of my head was, so Boston Glow. We got off the ground. We were sort of running really quickly on fumes. It was about five of us, gathering together, doing the nonprofit paperwork, and figuring out what we were doing. Right, we were making it up as we go along, essentially. And so we were able to work with a group of teens in the Artists for Humanity group, which is fantastic. If you've ever worked with that organization, they're just amazing. They do wonderful things. But we were able to run an after school program with some of their kids. And as I mentioned, we had a scholarship contest, which was essay based. And, at this one point, I'd been working with a student a couple times, and I was like, "You're a fantastic writer. Like, is your application all set? Like, did you put it in?" And she was like, "Oh, no, I'm not doing that." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Why? What's up?" And she just looked at me and she said, "I'm not going to win that, so why should I apply?"
Ooh.
And in my head, as the organizer of this, I was like, "We have 2 applications for 10 scholarship slots. If you apply, you are pretty much guaranteed to get it." So, first of all, your snapshot understanding of this is wrong, but it was so much more interesting to me to hear her saying this, because not only was it a little heartbreaking, but it was exactly what I had been reading about in the studies, in what everything says about how girls opt out of things that they feel like they can't perfect, whereas typically, just brain chemistry wise, boys from a much younger age have a natural inclination to almost video game through life, where they try and they die and they try and they die and they try and they die and they try and they die. Whereas girls will not attempt to play if they don't think that they can succeed. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is this in action, right? It's happening right in front of me. Um, and I sat down and talked with her, and I was like, well, how about this? How about you try? Do you want to just write an essay? You don't have to submit it. You and I can go over it, but I think you're a really good writer, and I think you would actually be fantastic for this. I think you have the ideas that we're talking about. And the whole point of this workshop that we were doing with them was a multi-week thing to be able to build the skills to submit these materials, so that it was a little bit more supported and it wasn't just, throwing pasta at the wall. But she did. She said she'd try, and we sat down and we worked on it for a couple of weeks, and she submitted it, and she ended up getting the scholarship. And she was just floored, right? She was just did not expect that she would be able to do this. Never thought that she would be able to. Um, but then tried and did, and that has always stuck with me. And for both reasons, right? For both the reason that the attitude that she was carrying into it at first, that I think was given to her, right? Like, this is something she had learned from society and culture, not even anybody she loves, but society and culture. Um, and then to be able to see her work against it, try anyway, and win was fantastic. And it was just really, really an amazing moment.
That's awesome. I love it. That is a story of impact. I like that. So, all right. My favorite question. Mm, Some people disagree. Can you share a blooper? It doesn't mean something went wrong. It just didn't go as planned. And what did you learn from it?
Oh my goodness. So, first of all, a primary function of a lot of the roles that I've held is events planning. So, I do a lot of events. Every single event I have ever run has had something go from minorly to catastrophically wrong. And this is everything from the flowers getting, a notification that actually they're going to be 2 weeks after the event arriving, not, a week before. And, a speaker canceling, or something falling down in the middle, or there's no volume on the Zoom, or all of the things that are ultimately fixable, but that end up in a kerfuffle. Um, which is always just to say that everything goes wrong. Things will always go wrong.
Yeah.
I think, what's like a big one? What's a good funny one? Oh, nothing's coming to mind as like a huge, huge epic fail. But yeah, just so many missteps. The email didn't get sent out. Um, oh, the microphones. The microphones are never working, right? Like, at this point in my life, anytime I show up to an event with microphones, I have like a 6-pack of 3 different kinds of batteries somewhere in my bag. Um, and I think a lot of that has taught me that how many different things you need to check on, but then also how many different people you need to be able to rely on and check in with, and the questions you need to ask. I think that's all sort of one of the big experience learning things that I've had. Maybe one of the biggest things that I've learned that I would consider close to a fail is when you need to sort of like recalibrate programming. We had this at Boston Glow. We had this at Girl Scouts. And I've seen it. I haven't seen it so much at Lasell yet, but I'm sure it's coming because it always does. But what it comes down to is that I come into a situation, I'm human, and oftentimes I'm not necessarily part of the population that I'm joining, right, or working with. That's often a problem in volunteerism that you're coming from an outsider of the community to inside the community. And you naturally make assumptions about what the problem is, and maybe the symptom of the problem, or maybe it's the cause of the problem. And no matter what, I have been wrong.
Hmm.
So, from different things like troubleshooting the process to get that scholarship contest off the ground, where we're like, oh, this was not actually the problem. It's not that they don't have critical writing skills. It really was that confidence piece. So, how do we get the confidence piece? Or things like planning things for, in Girl Scouts, there's sort of all these multi layers of um, grouping. So there are the girls are in a troop. We have troop leaders. The troop leaders are sort of overseen by the service units. The service units then talk to council, then councils talk to national, and on up. So, we have about 15,000, anywhere from 13,000 to 15,000 adult volunteers in the GSCMA footprint. And I think one of the things that we had seen on some evaluations with they were like, "Oh, we'd like to see this from council and this from council and this from council." Turns out they did not actually. They really wanted to have their community re-strengthened and then supported by council. But they really wanted that. Girl Scouts in so many ways comes from the community first. It is hyper local and it can draw on resources from national or regional footprints. But the best way it operates is hyper local. So the more you can infuse into letting communities do it their own way in a way that is reflective of them and responsive to them, the more successful they are. So a lot of it is, coming in with gentle assumptions and always being willing to unlearn them. And then, having no pride, having no pride whatsoever. It's not about me. It's about, in all of these jobs that I've done, it's taking myself out of the equation and really figuring out the best way to support, the people, the kiddos, whoever I'm working with, that it's about them.
That's awesome. I love it. All right, we're almost done with our conversation. So I'm going to give you the floor. I invite you to love, like just capital letters love, on maybe your favorite organization or the one you just have the most passion towards, why people should check them out, why they should get involved. Just love on them. Something we maybe didn't cover in our conversation today.
Ah, well, I'm gonna pretend you didn't say organization singular because I cannot choose just one.
Okay.
So I heard organizations plural. I don't know if we both
Okay,
heard
that's
that. Some ones that I love, Girls Right Now, WRIT. They are fantastic. They're doing fantastic work, encouraging, women, young girls to be writers and build those skills. All of these working dog organizations that are providing comfort services, and many, many other services. There's a lot of different, there's reading dogs, there's therapy dogs. There's so many different applications for working dogs in communities that are incredibly supportive. I mentioned Artists for Humanity, they're fantastic. Um, Points of Light is a really fantastic national organization that focuses on volunteering and how we serve communities in a very, very broad way. Um, I think there are some other writer-based organizations at Grub Street in Boston, which is just sensational. They are really, really focused on giving writers tangible resources and have incredible opportunities and resources for young writers and writers in marginalized communities. And they do fantastic things there. I also work with an organization called Kindling Words, that offers retreats to writers and tries to create community out of the spaces for published authors, which is oddly hard because sometimes being published and a writer gets a little isolating. So trying to make those community connections for people. Um, what else am I missing? YW Boston is probably doing some of the best work in diversity, equity, and inclusion that I have seen of any organization right now. The materials that they publish, some of the events that they're doing, they run these programs, these like essentially incubator programs to help nonprofits and companies really, really examine their strategies on DEI work. Um, just fantastic. So all of the above.
All the above, just shout outs and love on all of them. That's awesome.
Yes. And of course, I really think that ultimately working with nonprofits, working with volunteering, it is so much about what you care about, right? These are all my deep loves. But I think the most important thing to do for anybody who gives a hoot about any of this is to really think about the things that you love, the things that you really care about, the activities that you love, and see what ways you can support the community through them. Tiny actions help, tiny donations help, showing up to events, showing up for other people. It just means that you are creating a stronger community around you that you stand to benefit from, but of course, everybody else does too. The higher we raise the tent, the more people it covers. So I think that if you're looking for organizations to care about, look no further than your own heart. So
That's awesome. That's beautiful. All right. Thank you so much for being my guest today. I know that my listeners truly enjoyed everything that we talked about. So, to my listeners, I ask that you rate and review this episode wherever you listen to it, so other people can hear about motivating stories like this. So, I will look forward to seeing you next time on The Art of Volunteering. Have a great day.